Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council. The most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into this week's episode, a quick message from the BCRC.
When newborn calves don't get off to a healthy start, it can be stressful. However, the BCRC has developed the Calf 911 resources to help, including a video demonstrating effective calf resuscitation strategies. These techniques will help farmers respond quickly and provide timely care to newborn calves in need of resuscitation. You can find this resources and more linked in the show notes. This episode is titled, Utilizing Annual and Perennial Forages to Improve Productivity. This is one of a series of case studies on forage beneficial management practices from Alberta Agri-Systems Living Lab and Canfax. It is reprinted on beefresearch.ca with permission. What can I do about low productivity pastures or increase my feed supply? Several beneficial management practices, BMPs, can improve pasture or feed yields, increase the proportion of desirable species in a forage stand, improve overall forage quality, or have beneficial impacts on soil quality. A variety of methods can be used to achieve these goals, such as grazing management, reseeding, sod seeding, overseeding, utilizing different forage mixtures for pasture or feed production, applying fertilizer, manure, and/or herbicide application. The benefits from using these practices may include increased yields, improved average daily gain, increased potential to retain soil moisture, more grazing days, reduced winter feed costs or impact of drought, and better body condition on cows. 3 producers have shared their firsthand experiences with the following BMPs, so that their insight and knowledge may help others looking to try these practices on their own operations. Intercropping wheat and Italian ryegrass. Susan Heather started an intercropping project on her farm near Nanton, Alberta in 2023. The goal of this Alberta Agri-Systems Living Lab project was to reduce wind erosion, increase grazing days, and capture more moisture during the 3 months the field would normally sit bare. The field sits on a reclaimed gravel site, and Susan wanted to do just those little things to try and make it a little bit more productive and add more organic matter. The wheat was air-seeded, and Italian ryegrass was floated on the field the day after the wheat was seeded. The field was then rolled to prevent moisture loss and increase seed-to-soil contact. The intercrop was planted in an irrigated field. Wheat was silaged for feed for their finishing operation. Bred cows and heifers grazed the ryegrass in the fall. Susan felt that intercropping gave the ryegrass a running start so that it was ready for grazing shortly after the wheat was removed. Manure and urine from grazing returned nutrients to the soil and may reduce the amount of fertilizer needed in the future. It's definitely a win for us, especially in a year when feed is so expensive, says Heather. The Heathers assumed the wheat crop yield would suffer because of competition with the ryegrass, but to their surprise, they saw an increase in tonnage off our Italian ryegrass with the wheat versus the Czech where we just had the wheat. The addition of this field to the pasture rotation reduced grazing pressure on their native grasslands. A warm December in 2023 allowed grazing to continue well into January, significantly reducing winter feeding time and cost. Irrigation was a key factor in the success of this project. However, some other local dryland producers have had success with similar intercropping systems. It's important to consider your rainfall and soil moisture if you are considering intercropping, and it may be beneficial to consult with your local agronomist or seed representative. This is a BMP that may be useful for producers interested in gaining some additional grazing days from their crop fields, while also potentially reducing fertilizer use. Tame pasture rejuvenation. In 2020, Terry and Brad Mappin wanted to improve a newly purchased piece of tame pasture on their farm near Byamore, Alberta, that hadn't been taken care of. Described by Terry as a hodgepodge of we're not really sure what it was, Brad used an air seeder after a few runs with discs to get a more consistent grass-legume mix. Unfortunately, Brad seeded too deep the first time around and didn't get much growth at all. After a few seasons of trial and error and some timely rainfall, they got the thicker and healthier grass-legume mix they were hoping for, a second pasture at the Mappin's operation that had been degraded after a few seasons as a calving pasture. They heavily grazed until mid-June, dissed, seeded, and fertilized. The heavy grazing reduced competition for the new seedlings, while also keeping some pasture available for one more quick grazing pass later in the summer. A key was the speed of this pass. As Terry mentions, I skipped them through there fairly quickly, 1 to 2 days max, so that they didn't get to those seedlings. The fear was that if the cows got past some of the previous litter and into the seedlings, they'd overgraze the tender new growth and jeopardize the newly established plants. The Mappins noticed increased calf weights because of the higher nutrition from the new stands, but a before and after rejuvenation comparison in terms of forage production was difficult because of drought conditions in 2021. However, they were able to keep a good stockpile of hay, and the rejuvenated pasture was still grazed the next year despite the dry conditions. Forage mixtures for silage. Derek Friend switched to a 12-species forage blend for silage production in 2023 for his cow-calf operation in central Alberta. Previously, he planted a monocrop rotation of either barley, oats, wheat, peas, or canola on the field. The goal for this field was to find a silage blend that could balance lower inputs, rejuvenation the soil, and maintain acceptable yields. This new blend includes Italian ryegrass, radish, clovers, millet, forage rape, oats, other grasses, and barley as a base. Derek limited tillage on the field to a single disc pass instead of the typical 3 to 4 passes, and seeded in May to make sure the warm season species would not be caught in a late frost. No fertilizer was added either, so the total number of passes over the field was much lower than previous years. Derek assumed the silage yield would suffer, given the minimal tillage and lack of fertilizer, but at about 10 plus tons an acre, the result was likely closer to an average yield than lower harvest he expected. This ended up being a great result while keeping fuel and machinery costs low. Although this blend worked on Derek's operation, keeping expectations realistic and selecting species based on their ability to grow together are important factors for switching to these blends. Maintaining optimal species composition with intensive grazing. A strategy Derek uses to get the most out of his pasture and keep one species from becoming dominant is an intense, almost daily rotation for grazing. The move from a continuous summer grazing system to intensive rotational grazing was done to keep all species in the pasture evenly grazed. Like the Mappins, it's hard to compare body conditioning and average daily gain between years in the 2020s, but Derek has noticed his cows eating more from the competition for the best bites.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.